Welcome to the California Sun Podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Schechtman. Tonight, more than 500,000 Americans will sleep on our streets. In Los Angeles County alone, tens of thousands of these individuals struggle with severe mental illness, caught in a devastating cycle of homelessness and psychiatric crisis. The traditional response has been a revolving door of emergency rooms, temporary holds, and back to the streets. But in 2019, one doctor decided to completely reimagine this broken system. When Dr. Shayan Rab became LA County's first full-time street psychiatrist, he brought with him a revolutionary vision. If patients couldn't come to care, care would come to them. What began as a solitary mission has evolved into the groundbreaking Home Team Homeless Outreach and Mobile Engagement, a comprehensive program that's transforming psychiatric care for the unhoused. This isn't just about prescribing medications on street corners. The Home Team has pioneered innovations like mobile medical services, street-based court proceedings for conservatorship, and what Dr. Rab calls the housing pipeline, a system that's achieved an extraordinary 85 to 90% success rate in permanent housing placement. Perhaps most remarkably, they've shown that sometimes the path to healing begins not with a prescription, but with a simple breakfast at McDonald's and a conversation about hope. Today, as cities across America grapple with a homelessness crisis that seems to defy solution, Dr. Rab's program has become a model for a new approach, one that combines psychiatric expertise with profound human connection. As Associate Medical Director for Field-Based Services at the Los Angeles County Department of Mental Health, he's demonstrating that when we meet people where they are, literally and figuratively, transformation becomes possible. Dr. Shayan Rab joins us today to share his journey from traditional psychiatry to street healer and to help us better understand how his revolutionary approach might offer a path forward in one of America's most pressing humanitarian crises. It is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Shayan Rab here to the California Sun Podcast. Dr. Rab, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. That is one of the kindest and most beautiful introductions I've ever heard. It is an honor to be here.
Well, it is a delight to have you here. Thank you so much. In so many ways, the idea of bringing psychiatry, medicine, bringing these services to the street seems like such a common sense approach. And yet it's something that was not done for a very long time, and something that even when you started doing it, came in for some criticism and pushback. Talk a little bit about that first.
I have to say, during my entire training, during my undergraduate training, during my medical training, during my residency training, there never really was a focus on how to provide customized care to people who were experiencing homelessness. It was a population that was there was not a lot of specific training and education provided on, and there was no real cultural and structural angle to understand that people who are unhoused don't just need a treatment plan, they actually need support so that treatment plan can be implemented. And much to my embarrassment, a lot of the people who were unhoused that I worked with in the emergency room, in the inpatient ward, in the outpatient clinic, they were just, the approach was kind of just explained to you by senior attendings. There wasn't people who were in the space that understood the realities of people experiencing homelessness. We only evaluated these folks within our walls. We didn't understand the realities they were facing outside of the hospital and what sort of what sort of foundational interventions you would make so they could succeed beyond the walls of the hospital or beyond the walls of the clinic. It was always a question that was left with me during training. Where are folks in the hospital coming from? Where are they going? Are my orders and my treatment plans being effective? None of this integration was really present, and it left me with a lot of curiosity for what's happening beyond the walls of a hospital. That curiosity always stuck with me, and when I first came to the street, I was shocked at the breakdown of any sort of psychiatric plan. The moment that someone left a hospital and came into the realities of their living conditions, any sort of treatment plan would fall apart. And even when I became a street psychiatrist, when I tried to reach out to the hospitals and say, hey, I'm working with this individual, he has schizophrenia, I tried X, Y, and Z medication that's not working. Can you help me stabilize this individual? The question was, what's a street psychiatrist, and who are you? It was it was a very difficult time when I first started, and I had to kind of spend a lot of time, developing a brand and building relationships with hospital and showing that if you work with psychiatrists outside in the field, you can actually have transformative interventions for these folks.
The other way in which it was transformative is that it was an alternative or something that would come first before this idea of housing first, because so much of putting people in housing turns out to be unsuccessful because some of these issues are not addressed.
Yeah, a lot of the times when we think of people experiencing homelessness, we immediately think of housing. Housing is for someone who might have experienced homelessness for years or even decades. Housing is not a simple solution. In fact, housing can be very challenging. It requires you to be independent in many of your functions. It requires, coordinating with the people who are living there. It requires higher level activities that someone needs proper rehabilitation and training for. And that's only if they're not living in their own alternative reality. In the case of schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, a lot of the folks might not have the stability to navigate or maintain housing if it's provided. So many of these folks do need treatment before we can formally approach a housing first initiative. At least that's what I learned from my experience on the street. Treatment must come first for someone to have a rational understanding of what housing means and what their responsibilities will be to maintain housing.
One of the other pushbacks that you've talked about that you experienced in doing this was the idea of bringing medication to these patients on the streets.
When I first began treating my first patient on Skid Row, it was both a bittersweet experience because I was able to convince the patient that I was there as a supportive individual, someone they could trust, and they agreed to take medications from me. But now the real challenge starts when someone says, "Yes, doctor, I'll take your medications." But now, how do you actually ensure this person is going to receive and comply with the schedule, comply with the schedule at which they're supposed to take their medications? And it was a no-brainer for us, for someone who can barely even sometimes keep their shoes on. There's going to be no option except hand delivering their medications every single day. And that's exactly what we did. We can't give people who are too busy focusing on surviving, too busy, trying to get access to food and clothing, to expect them to take a medication at 9 o'clock in the morning every single day or to fill a prescription from a pharmacy. So we realized that we actually have to bring not only the providers, but the treatment also needs to be delivered right into their hands. And we developed our own model of doing daily medication delivery to ensure people were receiving their medications and complying with them, so we could adjust the dose and maybe even get them on long-acting injections so they wouldn't need to take a daily oral medication.
Talk about the long lasting injections, because that was another area that ran into a lot of criticism and pushback.
So one of the most impairing parts of schizophrenia and bipolar disorder and other serious mental health illnesses is that people lose insight and judgment. They lose motivation. They oftentimes don't even know that they have a mental health condition. So compliance can be a big concern. Oral medications have an advantage where you can start them pretty quickly, you can adjust them pretty quickly. But one of the downsides of oral medication, especially in this population, is compliance. Someone needs to take a medication every single day, and if they, are unable to meet that consistency, the medications won't really take an effect. And in fact, it's dangerous to take medications inconsistently because it can increase your risk for side effects. A lot of the antipsychotics that are out there for these serious mental health conditions come with a long-acting injection, which is a formulation designed to be in your system for a month or sometimes a little bit longer. When these medications are in your system, it does at least guarantee some level of compliance with this medication. You can't just show up and give these injections. You need to make sure that an individual has documented tolerability to the medication, they're not having an adverse reaction, and that you feel comfortable putting injection in them for an entire month. It would be very dangerous to just show up and give this injection, especially if someone hasn't demonstrated tolerability, because then you could condemn them to an entire month of side effects, which might even require hospitalization.
One of the interesting and ironic things about all of this and some of the pushback that you have run into is that we've heard over and over again that we need to be looking at mental health the same way we look at other diseases, that we need to use the same kind of disease model to look at mental health. But yet when treating mental health that way on the streets, suddenly people want to look at it differently.
Yeah, unfortunately, mental health has been stigmatized in our histories for centuries, and it doesn't. Oftentimes, it can be confused with a disease of character or a disease of values or morals, but that's not true. Mental illness, just like a physical health illness, is a treatable condition that comes with certain signs and symptoms. A headache might come with pain in the head. It might come with high blood pressure. It might come with other things that are very tangible and easy to grasp. But unfortunately, mental illness comes with delusions, changes in behavior, inability to function socially or complete work requirements. And oftentimes it can be confused that these are character flaws rather than a mental illness taking a hold of someone's entire life.
Talk about the debate with respect to involuntary treatment and acceptance of treatment and why that's so difficult within this broader context.
With a lot of physical health conditions, insight and judgment are not typically impaired. For example, if you were to injure your leg seriously that required an x-ray, you would go to the hospital and get that assessed. Unfortunately, when it comes to particularly illnesses like schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, where people's insight and judgment are impaired, where they might be paranoid, they might be thinking that they're on some special mission, or they have some special powers, or there's some broader life mission that they need to accomplish, or they just don't have the motivation to complete any tasks. There is no insight and judgment, and people cannot appropriately reach out and seek the help that they need. For these individuals, you do need an environment where they can receive treatment and protect themselves against themselves. And that's why involuntary treatment, we take it very seriously. It's not, someone should not get involuntarily admitted at the drop of a hat, but if they meet the certain criteria where they're not providing for their own safety or for the safety of others, or when they can't care for themselves, it is essential to preserve their life by keeping them in a protected environment where they can receive treatment and get back on their feet.
Talk about what a major departure this is, the idea of seeking out patients, of going out on the streets, of doing all the things that you're doing and the home team is doing. What a major departure this is for the field of psychiatry.
So I want to be fully honest. Street psychiatry has been around for quite some time, but it's just been happening in small, isolated pockets with mental health practitioners and doctors who are, heroes who've been doing this for quite some time, along with all of the outreach staff that have been helping them. But it hasn't been, at least in Los Angeles County or for many parts of the nation, been kind of a very kind of developed subspecialty. If you ask me, in my heart, going to the patient and connecting with them has always been a key part of psychiatry. Unfortunately, if the patient is coming to you in a clinic or coming to you in an inpatient unit, it can feel like that you actually are going to them. But this only is true for people who are housed, because that their actual foundational function is something that someone who's also housed might be able to understand. But if people are unhoused, you cannot assume that any sort of care plan you come up with would be implemented in the same way for someone who is housed. So this idea of going out to people, I think, is always been a key element of psychiatry. That's what we call cultural competency. But it reached a brand new level when you are actually not just operating within a brick and mortar facility. You are literally going to the streets and seeing the harsh realities in which this highly underserved population has been living in for quite some time. It was a huge departure from how psychiatry has been done, and it was in the beginning it was very difficult to rally people to the cause, especially for people who've been doing traditional psychiatry for quite some time. But I was able to create a residency rotation with different psychiatry residency training programs across LA County there, and the newer generation of psychiatrists had more of an interest in going out and meeting people where they're at to be a force of change in the homelessness crisis that our nation is facing. That new blood of psychiatry was much more open to trying something different. I was very fortunate to find an entire cohort of doctors who were willing to take this journey with me, but it took a lot of time to get the number of people behind me that it would need to make a lasting difference.
And one of the points that you've made is that the traditional rules can't be applied, particularly to people that have been on the streets for a protracted period of time.
Absolutely not. The thing is, I always say this, but homelessness is not something that started yesterday. People living on the street with serious mental illness have been around for quite some time. During within the past 5 or 10 years, many of them have probably been held against their will and sent to hospitals where they got admitted to psych wards and got injections and got put in restraints. And there is a lot of stigma and against psychiatrists in general on the street. I'm not a welcome entity on the street. People on the street don't look at me and say, "Haha, yes, finally a psychiatrist." No, nobody is saying that, and I almost have to fight, years worth of negative experiences and undo that image that people in the street might have. So it does take it takes a fresh perspective. I have to be on the street and focus more so on building a doctor-patient relationship rather than reflexively diagnosing and prescribing medications.
Talk about that doctor-patient relationship, the importance of, and you referred to it before, the importance of the human connection as part of this holistic approach.
It's like I said, people on the street, psychiatry does not have the best street cred. And as a result, even when the model that the home team uses, psychiatry isn't the first line, the first line of defense in coming up with a treatment plan. We actually have a very structured approach. The first element of our model is outreach. And that can be anywhere from 3 to 6 weeks or longer, which is where our community health workers, our substance use counselors, our social workers, who have a much more skill in providing outreach and building the foundation of trust. Many of these the mental health practitioners also have lived experience, which they bring to the table and kind of build a bond with the individual that inspires trust. Only after that foundational trust is established are we going to enter the treatment phase, where we will send a nurse to complete a nursing assessment, to provide patient education, to improve activities of daily living. And only then is the psychiatrist coming in. We're coming in after we have established a rapport with the individual, and the patient is, the patient is given a very good framework that the psychiatrists are going to see as someone who has been doing this for quite some time. They're not a doctor who's going to lock them up or put them in a hospital and give them injections. They're just there to help them, improve their life. And that framing is very important. So that way the individual is in a space to actually hear the psychiatrist talk about how they can help them transform their life. And these conversations, I don't go up to someone and say, "When's the last time you were psychiatrically hospitalized?" or "What medications have you taken?" I actually go up and say, "When's the last time you had food? I see your shoes are torn. Would you like me to get some new shoes? Would you like for me to get new clothes? What's your favorite food? Let me get it for you. Where are you sleeping at night? Is it safe? Does your back hurt? Do you need ibuprofen to help ease the pain? We have beds nearby where you can sleep comfortably at night." That's how I open up my engagements, rather than jumping into medical and psychiatric formal questions.
To what extent does the legal framework play a role in this? What are the limitations that sets?
When on the street, there's different acuity of cases. A lot of the times, people don't really know that they have a mental illness, or don't and refuse care for irrational reasons, for reasons that aren't reality based. And we understand where these cases will end up, and we use the concept of therapeutic privilege, where if I'm in an outpatient clinic and, for example, I'm providing psychiatric care to a rocket scientist who is very aware of the science and minutia that goes into medications, I would spend more time jumping into treatment options and how each medication is created and what receptors in the brain they target, and go over a very detailed analysis of treatment options. But for someone who is on the street, who is scared, who is paranoid, who is terrified, who, if I don't use more general terms to get consent to start treatment, is likely going to get impaired to the point where they're going to be admitted in a hospital, where they will be involuntarily treated, where they will get put in restraints, where their safety might be impaired. There is a little bit of flexibility that I use in good faith to protect the patient from harm downstream that could result from ongoing neglect and untreated mental illness.
And does the recent case, the Grand Pass case, and some of the issues in California with respect to conservatorship, have those things helped make this process easier?
Well, conservatorship is something we take very seriously. When you are conserving someone, you are kind of, taking some of their rights away. We want to make sure that there is ample justification and interventions that are made that are less restrictive before that is even considered. Conservatorship is, the LPS Act and the expansion of grave disability are being made for a variety of reasons. People are dying on the street. The number of people dying every single year has gone up from 2014 to now, and in fact, people are dying at younger and younger ages. And if someone is unable to voluntarily accept care and get off the street, there's a very high likelihood that they could die on the street. LPS conservatorship, is, at least in California, is, we're looking at, it can only be considered if someone is gravely disabled. By grave disability, we mean that someone with a mental health condition is unable to provide for their food, clothing, or shelter as a result of the impairments of their mental illness. Sometimes this is needed. Sometimes people aren't. Sometimes no amount of rapport building, no amount of doctor-patient relationship building, no amount of treatment is really going to help stabilize someone, because they really have impairments that are truly profound. And the only way to help them remain sheltered and have access to their basic needs is to activate the LPS process. People who are experiencing homelessness oftentimes don't even get hospitalized, because they're quietly hiding away from the rest of the system, and truly might need this intervention, but don't get launched off to hospitals or other treatment providers where this intervention could even be considered. So by having the home team have access to this, we can very carefully make sure that we activate this process for people who have huge barriers in accessing health services.
How committed is Los Angeles County to this program?
Well, I would like to think that they're very committed, because the program has exponentially grown since 2019. We've had dramatic growth. In fact, if we started out with one full-time street psychiatry MD, and now we have 17, and we have a combination of nurse practitioners and MDs who are providing this service, and we have more than 10 UCLA, USC residents who are coming in to join our ranks. The number of teams has gone up from 10. Describe it as the home team program is more than a program. The home team program is a movement in psychiatry. It's a movement in mental health. It shows that by using a more integrated approach, by having a psychiatrist on the ground, and a mobile team of providers, we can integrate system-wide services into a uniform approach And that uniform approach with the power of the entire system working to transform a life, that is what the home team represents. And that is what is growing.
And finally, talk about the metrics of success and what you've seen.
I define success in many different ways. From a programmatic level, I can define success as how many people we're serving, and that number keeps going up. How many people we're housing, that number also goes up. I can also define metrics as how many clinical partnerships we have with different providers, with street medicine, with law enforcement, with other outreach teams, with emergency rooms and inpatient units. How big is our ecosystem? Is it growing? Are we making more integrated interventions? Are our treatment plans becoming more comprehensive? Are people getting better? Are the patients reporting satisfaction with this service? We can also define metrics with how many lifetime hospitalizations are we reducing by providing street-based services? How much money are we saving the system by providing treatment on the street and not utilizing emergency rooms and inpatient units to transform unhoused lives? That's more on a more programmatic basis, but I have some metrics that I personally also follow. And by the way, all of our metrics are really promising and encouraging that we're moving in the right direction. But on a more personal level, my metrics are with each client that I serve. Was I able to help this person get off the street? Was I able to help this person reunite with their families? Was I able to help one less person sleep on the street? That's how I personally define success, that I can actually come home at night and know that I was able to make a difference in this crisis, even if it's for one person, that I was able to get them off the street and help them reunite with their families and find joy, meaning, and purpose in life and hope beyond the streets.
Dr. Shayan Rab, I thank you so very much for spending time with us.
It is my absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for hosting me on this and on your podcast, and for allowing me a space to share some of my experience here.
Thank you. And thank you for listening and joining us here on the California Sun podcast. I hope you'll join us next week. I'm Jeff Sheckman. If you like this podcast, please feel free to share and help others find it by rating and reviewing it on iTunes, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.